This is a story I've wanted to tell for a long time. Stoneworks is a world-building Minecraft server where you can roleplay, build nations, destroy nations. If this sounds interesting to you, go to the IP play.stoneworks.gg. The most important part for Stoneworks, for me, are the stories that get told. Player interaction, improvisation, and creativity leads to tales that, rival like modern day novels. In this video, I want to tell my story. The story of Limuria, the story of Vindivegg, the story of Zamotz. The story of Zamotz. Stoneworks, as we know it, is going through a big change right now. Stoneworks has recently opened up a new world, and the worlds previous, Eldam and Rathnir, have been closed. This is a good chance to join the server, as it's a fresh start for everyone. I'll be creating a new character, new stories, all that stuff, so come and join me, and I'll be posting videos on it. Anyway, let's begin. This is the story of Foe-lelan. The story of empires, the story of corruption, overlords, war, all that you can name. Now sit tight as I tell you the wonderful and interesting story of Limuria.
To begin, I'll first have to shed some light on the world of Stoneworks. At this point, the world was built up of two continents, Rathnir and Eldam. However, at this current moment, Eldam was secret to the world, an undiscovered and unspoiled haven of beauty, fertile land and plentiful resources. Rathnir was host to many countries and many people. It was the capital of civilization. However, Rathnir's resources were becoming scarcer and scarcer. As the walls of cities expanded, the world became more tainted by the destruction of man. This lack of resources led to war. Eldam, on the other hand, found itself in a much more peaceful state. Eldam was populated by many small tribes, the largest of these being the kingdom of Limuria, habited by the Lemur folk people, and the tribe of Vulpenia, habited by the Vulper species. While Eldam was a complete mystery to Rathnir, the case wasn't entirely the same for the Eldamites. The Lemurian royal family had a dark secret. They knew of the foreign continent. The origins of this information had become lost to time, and its existence had formed into mere legend. Until one day a lone Rathniri ship arrived on the coast of Eldam, simple explorers looking for a place to settle. The Lemurian royal family immediately took them into custody. They were friendly and taught some of the Lemur folk their language, more about their homeland. In Rathnir, the language spoken is known as Traveller's Tongue. It's a language created by all its people to unite all the different cultures and races and the ability to communicate effectively. After learning the true power of Rathnir and its technological advancements, Lemuria's king realised just how bad it would be if Rathnir ever found Eldam. Eldam would be completely ravaged of its resources. Settlers throughout all of Rathnir would flock northeast. Limuria would stand no chance. Lemuria's king would have the settlers executed. He could not risk the discovery of Eldam. The king would send one of his sons, Prince Foe-lelan, the protagonist of this story, with a small group of Lemurians to go to Eldam and observe its people and nations, ensuring the secrecy of Eldam remains. Separated from his entire family and people, Foe-lelan made the journey across the vast ocean towards Rathnir to start his royal mission. Foe-lelan and his crew arrived in northern Sparwood, on the east side of Rathnir. Looking for a place to settle down and set up a forward operating base, they quickly found Seraphini, a small city on the coast of Sparwood. Foe-lelan met a Seraphinian called Erinos, and they quickly became close friends. Erinos was a human who had been bonded with a strange artifact known as the Eye of Shinobu. They both got jobs together at Exandria Co., working for its CEO Crimson Dragon. Exandria Co. specialised in building defensive structures and fortifications. They were currently tasked with the construction of a great stone wall around the capital to help prepare the Maritime Republic of Seraphini for the possibility of war in Sparwood. Sparwood was in a state of political unrest, with the UFK becoming a bigger threat of invasion and the UBSR trying everything in its power to entice the countries of Sparwood to join its new union, the CSCS. The Council of Sparwood City-States. The Maritime Republic of Serafini was currently doing everything it could to avoid getting involved with any of Sparwood's politics, but it looked like Serafini would have to get involved in some way or another. Foe-lelan began making connections with the important and politically powerful people of Serafini, such as province leaders, members of Zignora, and its current leader, Dino. He soon made his way up to negotiating starting his own province in the swamps north of Serafini's capital. However, there was one obstacle. The land was under the control of Teutonia, a nation neighbouring Serafini to the north. Serafini didn't want to look like they were expanding in the north. This expansion would have Serafini sharing a border with the UBSR, and it could be regarded as a threat to them. Dino demanded that if Foe-lelan were to create a province in the northern swamps, he would have to negotiate for the land as an independent party. Then, after he creates a small state there, he would then have it join the Republic of Serafini as a new province. Foe-lelan agreed to these terms and headed north with Eranos to start the new project. Foe-lelan believed this would be a suitable base of operations for him and his Lemurfolk crew to observe the politics and discussions of Rathnir. Foe-lelan and Eranos created a small encampment to begin their new town, with bare necessities such as a small wheat farm, a temporary mine, and a tent for storage and sleeping. Foe-lelan then contacted Teutonia and began negotiations for the land. Foe-lelan then began negotiations with the Teutonia representative. The representative explained the terrible situation that the state of Teutonia has found themselves in. Teutonia has seen famine, poverty, and bandits, and were in a perilous situation where they had to always be ready for a bandit attack. Foe-lelan explained how his new country would join the Maritime Republic of Serafini, and in return for the northern swampland, he'd guarantee that Teutonia would have access to the benefits of Serafini's military at any time they were needed. Teutonia agreed to these terms, and Foe-lelan's new settlement was now considered an independent nation in Sparwood. This was when Foe-lelan and Eranos named it Vindivegg, which translates to wind walls in the Lemurfolk language. Vindivegg would soon lose its independence and join Serafini as its newest and largest province. Not long after, Teutonia fell to banditry and famine. Serafini then peacefully annexed them and increased their territory largely. Foe-lelan would keep a close eye on Rathniri politics and divert the attention of the population's gaze away from the possibility of discovering Eldam as much as he could. Vindivegg grew as a province, and so did Foe-lelan's political power in the region of Sparwood. He built up connections with politically powerful members of the Maritime Republic, and became very well known and powerful member of the Serafinian governing body. The elections for the Maritime Republic were approaching, and Foe-lelan convinced a reluctant Eranos to run for Doge, leader of the Republic. Foe-lelan would have ran for Doge himself if not for the worries from the voting public, thinking that he was here to reclaim as much power as possible, an outsider, as he was already a leader of Serafini's largest province. Together, they created the Eranos Party and made connections with powerful politicians and people from all around Serafini's borders. The Eranos Party consisted of the Lonely Biscuit, Eranos, and Foe-lelan. Their chances of winning looked high, as their opponent was an independent single-man party led by Crimson Dragon. However, he was still a large threat, as he was close friends with Serafini's current Doge, Dino. His business, Exandria Co., and what it had done for Serafini in the past, gave Crimson Dragon a worthy reputation in Serafini. Campaigning was long and exhausting for everyone involved, and the Eranos Party would do a speech to Serafini's people to try and gain their vote. However, the outcome was not as they had hoped. Eranos was mocked and bullied for its stutter and his lack of confidence. As a result, he pulled himself out the run for Doge, meaning Crimson Dragon would be guaranteed the spot as no one else was running against him. Foe-lelan, disgusted by the reaction of the Serafinian Republic and Crimson Dragon, decided to stop running for Secretary of Layman and run against Crimson Dragon in the position of Doge. The public's reaction to Foe-lelan running for Doge was more positive than he imagined. Foe-lelan convinced Eranos to not leave the political landscape and still run for Secretary of Layman, meaning no matter what, the Eranos Party would have a 3 to 5 majority in the Signora, the High Council of the Republic, in which whom the elected members vote on laws and bills. A majority would mean Foe-lelan and his party would win every vote within the council, and if they coordinated their votes accordingly, they would more or less have all the power in the Signora. Adding to Foe-lelan's plan was the fact that elections in the Republic allow for candidates to run for more than one position at once, meaning that even if Foe-lelan lost, he would still have a guaranteed spot within the Signora. The results were to come soon, and the public of Serafini waited to see which party would win. The Republic announced that the Doge election outcome was a 60 to 40% majority for the Crimson Dragon Party. Foe-lelan was deeply saddened by this loss. Foe-lelan had at least 5 confirmed votes to fellow party members and bribery, meaning there was no way he could only have 40% of the vote. He began to completely believe that Dino had manipulated the votes, as he was the one in charge of running the ballots, and Dino had a history of supporting Crimson Dragon's bills and proposals. Foe-lelan spread his belief of the results being tampered with throughout all of Serafini and her provinces. The Ernos party decided upon all resigning, leaving the Signora with only 2 members, Dino and Crimson. The lack of leadership and order in the government put Serafini in a dangerous political landscape. This was Serafini at its lowest possible point, as its people were divided and the threat of civil war grew. Foe-lelan declared the province of Vindivegg independent as its own nation, and many Serafinian citizens followed to escape the collapsing government. Crimson Dragon seen the only way to save his country from anarchy, to join the CSCS, the Council of Sparwood City-States, and gain support from the UBSR to help rebuild the crumbling government. The CSCS agreed upon the terms that if Serafini joined the newly established union, the CSCS would deploy a plan to help Serafini re-establish order. Crimson Dragon was unhappy with Vindivegg's removal from Serafini and told Foe-lelan that the land is not his to take. If Foe-lelan was not to return the land to the Republic peacefully, then the CSCS would take it back forcefully. In response, Foe-lelan founded the Vindivegg Resistance. The Vindivegg Resistance consisted of ex-citizens of Serafini and fighters from all around of Sparwood, who believed in Vindivegg's cause. The CSCS, in response, declared war against the Resistance publicly, and announced their plans to invade Vindivegg in a week. The Vindivegg Resistance spent the week preparing defences and fortifications throughout the surrounding swamplands. The CSCS brought a large battalion of fully geared, well-trained soldiers to deal with the Vindivegg threat, leaving the Resistance fighters completely outnumbered and underprepared. Ernos tried to convince Foe-lelan to surrender, but Foe-lelan insisted that this fight wasn't about winning, it was about the message. What it could show to the people of Sparwood about the CSCS and Serafini. The CSCS charged the walls of Vindivegg, while the Resistance fired arrows upon them to slow their attack. However, their arrow barrages were mostly ineffective, only slowing the movement of the CSCS troops. After the CSCS breached the walls, the Resistance stood no chance, and most of the Resistance's forces were killed in the first minute after the breach. Foe-lelan's crew of Lemurfolk from Eldam were killed, and Ernos sacrificed himself, fracturing the magical artifact, the Eye of Shinobu, he was in possession of, to create an explosion which killed 7 CSCS troops along with himself. Foe-lelan was the only member of the Vindivegg Resistance to survive. After fleeing north into the swamps, Foe-lelan took shelter in a dark and dirty cave as he reflected on what had just happened. He had managed to recover the fragments of the Eye of Shinobu, which contained segments of Ernos' soul. The guilt of being the only survivor, despite being the Resistance's leader, crushed him. However, the message was sent. Not long after the fall of Vindivegg, the UFK used the destruction of Vindivegg as an excuse to invade Serafini, which still hadn't recovered from the chaos that the civil war had caused. The fall of Vindivegg created enough political unrest in Sparwood that it led to the CSCS disbanding, due to the division and war between their allies. In the end, Vindivegg had won long term against the CSCS. Foe-lelan buried the bodies so he could recover, and started to head east. He managed to sneak past CSCS patrols and steal a boat from the Serafini docks, using it to sail up north through Sparwood and cross the ocean eastward, from Rathnir to Eldam. Once arriving back in Eldam, he isolated himself in a small cabin he built in the snowy mountains of Elastria. where he would spend all his time reflecting on the mistakes he believed he had made. He slowly started to waste away in this cabin, living life with no purpose, until one day he heard news of Rafnir's colonization of Eldam. His royal goal that he swore an oath to do, to keep Eldam concealed from Rafnir, he had failed that mission too, and Limuria was under invasion. He then returned to Limuria and his family to help defend his people's homeland, marking the beginning of a new start for Foe-lelan in Eldamite politics. Foe-lelan would be very involved in Lemuria's decision-making and was a vital catalyst in the Skjoldbirdir-Lemurian War. Limuria had recently begun its war with Skjoldbirdir, a Rathnirian nation looking to establish a colony in Foros, the continent where Limuria was located. Skjoldbirdir had begun trying to take over many Lemurian settlements, and then establish their own in their place. The Lemur folk began evacuating Lemuria's capital city, Havoana-Ruar-Venaj. Deeply upset by Skjoldbirdir's claim to the Lemurian homeland, the Lemurians had been enacting violent attacks on Skjoldbirdir forces. Skjoldbirdir would retaliate by launching an assault on the capital to put an end to the Lemur folk resistance and finish Lemuria off once and for all. However, this result would fail due to the intense military support from the Lemurian Defense Force. They made sure Limuria could hold on to the capital until Skjoldbirdir left the area due to defensive strategy carried out by the Vaemorian Guard, Snow RD. Skjoldbirdir would be unable to pierce through the capital's defences and would suffer a great loss. This would be one of Lemuria's greatest successes during the Skjoldbirdir-Lemurian War. However, in this battle, Skjoldbirdir assassins managed to kill both the king and queen of Limuria, and their next heir, Drafanaris, Foe-lelan's older brother, would become new king of the Lemur folk. Now Foe-lelan was next in line to take the throne if something were to happen to Drafanaris. After Lemuria's victory during the siege of Havoana-Ruar-Venaj, Limuria prepared to launch an assault on Skjoldbirdir's current main colony, Steinborg, which is built into the southern mountains of Foros. Foe-lelan would act as one of their main scouts, sneaking in and out the city to gather intel on key fortifications and gaps in their defences. After providing this intel to the Lemurian Defence Force, they began to draft a plan of attack. During the time before the Battle of Steinborg, Skjoldbirdir colonists would wipe out the rest of Lemuria's remaining settlements, leaving Havoana-Ruar-Venaj as the last city of Limuria. Skjoldbirdir forces were scattered and unprepared for an attack, so they built up a mercenary army and began to fortify their colonies to defend against the Lemurian forces. The Lemurian Defence Force would divide into 3 separate battalions for this attack, each with their own specific roles. Foe-lelan was put in charge of the 2nd Battalion, which was to focus on fighting their way through Steinborg streets as the other 2 battalions focused fighting atop the mountains that surrounded it. On the day of the battle, the Lemurian Defence Force, also known as the LDF, faced intense retaliation from the defensive forces of Steinborg. After climbing the wall and moving into the streets of Steinborg, Foe-lelan moved his troops to the city, slowly making their way towards the centre. However, during the battle, they were surrounded and pushed into a Skjoldbirdir fighting arena, where they were swarmed and wiped out. Foe-lelan regrouped with other battalions after fleeing. Skjoldbirdir forces managed to push back the Lemurians and corner them. After trapping most of their forces in the centre of the city, Skjoldbirdir launched an attempt to take Havoana-Ruar-Venaj, while the majority of the Lemurian forces were focused in the assault. The Skjoldbirdir forces managed to breach Havoana-Ruar-Venaj and take it over, killing most of its civilians. Havoana-Ruar-Venaj was now under Skjoldbirdir's control, leaving the Lemur folk completely scattered and near extinction. This day marked the end of the Skjoldbirdir-Lemurian War. Lemuria, now at its lowest, had lost its homeland and its capital city. The siege of Steinborg had been a complete failure and had directly caused Lemuria's fall. Drafanaris and Foe-lelan would lead the remaining Lemur folk southwards towards the Isle of Zamotz. They established the settlement of Kolnor as an attempt to regroup their people. The Lemur folk began the construction of a large defensive temple and began to make connections and allies with the current states that were also on the small island of Zamotz. Drafanaris began to plan how to unify the island. Cyrilla, another native country in the island, declared itself a protectorate to Lemuria. and to aid in defending against the enemies it had made during the Skjoldbrir-Lemurian War in the Kingdom of Arvaria, who currently had their eyes on colonising the Isle of Zamotz. Some of Zamotz's native countries, such as the state of Sunter and the even unrecognised state of Alatsania, began taking precautionary measures and became opening to ties surrounding countries that felt equally threatened by coloniser. After the UBSR made attempts to try and make colonies in Zamotz, Drafanaris began negotiations with their neighbours to unite under one banner, leading to the foundation of the Zamotz Union. After Zamotz had been unified, they quickly began to expand. Foe-lelan became a minister and spent his own time involved in running in the country, along with Drafanaris and the rest of the Union's ministers. However, Drafanaris and Foe-lelan still had retaking their homeland as their primary goal. The Zamotz Union publicly denounced Skjoldbrir and vowed that they would one day return Limuria to the lemur folk. Zamotz began to grow its power, expanding to accepting member states not just within the island. After a while, the Zamotz Union had grown into one of Eldam's largest powers. Foe-lelan was involved in many of the Union's and political disputes and wars, such as the Battle of New Dorstock, the War of the Black Flag, and the Alechian Independence Campaign. As Zamotz grew, so did the possibility of Zamotz being strong enough to take back the lemur folk homeland. Drafanaris and Foe-lelan began to plan how they could partake in such a feat. During this time, Foe-lelan lived both in Kolnor, Lemuria's settlement in Zamotz, and the city of Sunter, in Zamotz's most central mountains. Then came the War of the Broken Shield. The idea of the Zamotz Union attempting to take back Lemuria went from just being a concept to now being an eventuality. Tensions grew in Onthukan as nations and empires prepared for war. Propaganda was made by both the Zamotz Union and the Skjoldbrir in an attempt to gain allies with other nations and increase the size of their militaries. Public opinion was mixed. Many felt that this land belonged to the lemur folk, and it always had. However, there was a large amount of people who believed that Skjoldbrir owned the land rightfully, and the Zamotz Union was just looking for more political power and territory. The arms race continued until the day came when the Zamotz Union officially declared war on Skjoldbrir, with the intention to lay siege on the Skjoldbrir-controlled city of Hefnaheim in an attempt to retake their homeland. Drafanaris gave Foe-lelan the job of making a public declaration on the war of Skjoldbrir. May the people of Lemuria return to their homeland they once knew. They were forced to make a decision: fight and risk the extinction of lemur folk as they knew it, or flee from the Vikings to fight another day. Well, that day is here. Here's to the soldiers once lost, and the battle ahead. Av Limuria. Skjoldbrir was expecting a war with Zamotz, so they were ready for the declaration of war. Unlike in the second Skjoldbrir-Lemurian War, where the Skjoldbrir had to resort to hiring a large amount of mercenaries to aid the defence of Steinborg. The Zamotz Union had mostly relied on allies for this war, with the Aristos and the AWE fighting by their side. The Zamotz Union was certain that the outcome would be a Skjoldbrir loss and a Zamotz Union victory. The Zamotz Union were preparing their military and also spent time creating strong relations with the surrounding nations to their geographical position in Eldam. The stage was set and both sides were ready, as ever, to face off once again in the city of mountains, Hefnaheim. The Zamotz Union was dedicated to taking back what they believed was rightfully theirs, or die trying. The Zamotz Union military rallied with their allies in the great city of Shirokineza, where they prepared and organised their forces for the upcoming assault of Skjoldbrir. As the antebellum came to a close, Skjoldbrir and her allies prepared for the defence, making sure that Hefnaheim was airtight as possible. The Skjoldbrir military positioned themselves in the walls, with archers covering the plains and the forest below them. Hefnaheim would not fall under the protection, they thought. As war crept closer and closer, the Zamotz Union moved their forces, led by Zamotz Chief Commander Iko. Their forward operating base was not positioned far from Hefnaheim. Foe-lelan recalled being able to see the archers positioned atop Hefnaheim's stone walls, with their bows drawn and ready. With the attack force now organised and ready to fight, the soldiers keenly awaited for the countdown to end and the chaos to begin. The Zamotz Union had organised its 4 battalions: the Aristios Battalion, officially referred to as the 1st Battalion, the AWE Battalion, officially 2nd Battalion, the Zamotz Battalion, officially the 3rd Battalion, and the Special Forces Battalion, officially the 4th Battalion. They were lined up and ready for war. Before the war, Skjoldbirdir forces outnumbered Zamotz by around 40 soldiers. Skjoldbirdir was confident it would win. As the war horn sounded and the Zamotz Union forces charged the steep mountainside of Hefnheim, arrows flew down, and with the only cover of a few thin trees, many Union soldiers were hit, and some were killed. As the mountainside was hard to traverse, many Unionist fighters felt themselves pinned down by oncoming arrow fire. At the first, the Zamotz Union were extremely worried that a loss was in sight, as many even couldn't get a chance to set near the mountain due to the efficiency of the Skjoldbirdir archers atop the Hefnheim walls. The Zamotz Union felt that they were fighting an impossible battle as they could not pierce the great walls of Hefnheim, and worried for the worst. Meanwhile, the Skjoldbirdir archers and foot soldiers above were beginning to feel overwhelmed due to the sheer amount of soldiers coming up from what seemed like every angle. The archers worked rhythmically, firing their arrows like a well-oiled machine as the Union fighters found themselves getting higher and higher up the hillside. Closer to piercing the walls, every second of the war was still uncertain for victory. The Zamotz Union military forces grew closer to finally finishing the climb. Skjoldbirdir sent soldiers down to attack the climbing forces to hinder their progress. Zamotz Union fighters managed to overpower the Skjoldbirdir soldiers who abandoned their high ground, and Skjoldbirdir's attempt to stop the climbing was futile. Though, during this counter-attack, some of Skjoldbirdir soldiers managed to get the Zamotz Union war camp to go fort and slay a couple soldiers restocking in its safety. However, the soldiers who got that far were quickly chased down and outnumbered by the sheer amount of troops the Zamotz Union had on the ground. The climb felt like it lasted for hours, but finally, a Zamotz Union soldier by the name of Committing was the first person to finally break the ongoing loop of chaos and climb the mountain to the top. He broke through the walled fortifications, and the Skjoldbirdir archers fell back to the inner city as Union fighters flooded through the halls into Hefnheim's central keep. The keep was quickly filled with Zamotz fighters and Skjoldbirdir forces. The Skjoldbirdir forces managed to close the Zamotz fighters in a specific location of the keep and quickly set up defensive positions inside the fort. The Zamotz Union's fighters were redirected their attack from the well-defended halls to the less defended basement below, where they planned to come back up to the halls from a less fortified angle. Skjoldbirdir managed to counter this by sending some troops to hold off the attackers in the basement, that gave Zamotz soldiers a chance to push even harder and take most of the halls above. This left Skjoldbirdir spread out and likely mostly unable to fight due to the unified group of invaders. After almost no casualties, the Zamotz Union soldiers managed to take the keep and kill all military forces within. Though, this was not the end of the bloodshed. Many Aristios battalion fighters committed war crimes by executing unarmed citizens and littering the halls with their bodies. Even though this is a very small percentage of the Union fighters committing these acts, it was still enough to spark outrage within Eldam. Once the keep had been taken, Foe-lelan made the political statement of sitting on the Skjoldbirdir throne to emphasise their victory. The Skjoldbirdir foot soldiers watched as the Zamotz Union fighters paraded round the streets and raised their banner over the once looming and powerful keep of Hefnheim. After the Skjoldbirdir defeat, their reputation as a primary political power in Eldam had phenomenally decreased. For the sake of their identity, another loss would not be acceptable. The leader of Skjoldbirdir at the time, High Jarl Akon, devised a plan to stop the Zamotz Union's aggression. Another war would not be the way to go forward, at least in his eyes. Skjoldbirdir would not fall to the ancient race of lemur folk which once ruled the lands they built their keeps and capitals upon. The nation of Skjoldbirdir decided that war would not be the way forward for central Eldam. Akon began negotiations with the Zamotz Union diplomats to devise a treaty which would end the Zamotz Union's aggression towards Skjoldbirdir's towns, cities, keeps and castle. After days of negotiations and arguments with Skjoldbirdir officials, the ministers of the Zamotz Union High Council finally voted upon and agreed the rules of the treaty they had discussed, which finalised the surrender of Skjoldbirdir. The treaty had caused much controversy and the arguments within the Zamotz Union High Council. Over the days of the votes, vetoing and negotiations, and it's apparent that not every minister would be happy with the outcome of the vote. Skjoldbirdir's High Jarl Akon awaited nervously for a reply, because the outcome of the negotiation would be a key factor of the survival of his nation. If the treaty was denied, the Zamotz Union decided that they would continue their attack on the Skjoberdir cities. The chances of Skjoberdir's survival as a nation would be lower than ever. Therefore, it delighted Skjoberdir's High Jarl when he heard the news that Zamotz Union's High Council ministers had finally decided that the Zamotz Union would agree to negotiating a treaty with Skjoberdir's Jarls. When Akon came to the Zamotz Union to negotiate for the future of Eldam as a whole, he suggested the best way for Eldam to recover and become once again a land of peace and harmony would be for the Zamotz Union to forge a treaty which would establish a non-aggression pact with the nation of Skjoberdir. The Zamotz Union High Council initially considered the non-aggression pact as an option to resolve the conflict, but when it came to the ministers casting their votes, they decided against the non-aggression pact with Akon, due to the unpredictability and dubious nature of the nation of Skjoberdir and her allies. After much debate between the Zamotz High Council members and a minister known as Balak cast the prompt forward, the Zamotz High Council finally cast their votes to decide what the future of Eldam would be. He cast forward the prompt that Skjoberdir would pay the Zamotz 650,000 coins in reparations, and that Skjoberdir's High Jarl Akon would publish a formal apology for what he and his people did to the Lemur folk race in their homeland Limuria. When the council votes came in, the results were published to the Zamotz Union public. 6 ministers of the High Council of the Zamotz Union voted against this prompt that Black put forward. 2 ministers voted to abstain, and finally 16 ministers voted in favour of it. This was a controversial outcome, because while the majority of the council believed that this is enough for Skjoberdir's genocidal campaign on the race that founded the Zamotz Union, others believe this is hypocritical and near opposing to what many soldiers fought for in the Battle of Heftheim. Opposers to the treaty, which included Foe-lelan, were angry that the Zamotz Union did not reclaim the Lemur folk homeland of Limuria while they had the chance. The Zamotz Union was built by the Lemur folk, and they were outraged when the non-Lemur folk ministers decided what would happen to their homeland. In the declaration made by Foe-lelan, he stated that the Zamotz Union was fighting to liberate Limuria and retake it for the Lemur folk, and the Zamotz Union's High Council was criticised for not following through with it. However, the supporters of the treaty argued that the Lemurias only held sentimental value and didn't help the Zamotz Union politically in any way. They also argued that Skjoberdir had already desecrated and industrialised the once sacred lands beyond repair, and restoring Limuria would be a further waste of the Zamotz Union's resources and money, which, in the end, wouldn't be worth the effort. Limuria would remain under Skjoberdir control, and it was known as Rudder's Dam. After the war, Foe-lelan focused on more internal politics in the Zamotz Union. Zamotz went through many changes, such as becoming the Zamotz Confederation, the Zamotz Commonwealth, etc. However, deep down, the people stayed the same. Foe-lelan mostly lived in his ship, the Veromian Narwhal, and also his house in Nova Veromia and Nova Bibshmibia. After many disputes and political schemes, controversial events and elections, they began to wear Foe-lelan down, and he decided to retire from politics. He started building a farming plantation in the central western mountains of Zamotz, and after a long time, the construction of the Yelksador Manor was finally complete. He began farming livestock and crops. He would stay in this farm a while, still helping out every now and then with the Zamotz government. Foe-lelan would welcome many different people into his manor to stay and work at the plantation, causing a small community to form around it. The small farming plantation began to slowly have more buildings put up, the first being a tavern owned by Foe-lelan known as the Drunken Lemur. After a while, this farm slowly turned into a town. Foe-lelan, paying respects to the many people he lost during the Civil War, named this town New Vindivegg. His retirement from politics was mostly short-lived, as he came into Zamotz politics and served as a council member for the Zamotz Commonwealth, representing the people of New Vindivegg. Foe-lelan, also during this period, opened more branches of the Drunken Lemur, one in Soliana, one in Sunter. Foe-lelan would also join the Soliana rebellion against Gangulia, in protest of the actions of the Mad King. He didn't participate in any skirmishes, however, he donated to their cause and flew Soliana's banner all throughout the streets of New Vindivegg. After a while, New Vindivegg was large enough to have a political importance enough for it to become its own province. The Zamotz Union Council voted in favour of its recognition. Foe-lelan appointed Binksy, a citizen of New Vindivegg and a close friend, as vice mayor. So after some negotiation with other provinces of the Zamotz Commonwealth, New Vindivegg's provincial territory was finalised. As the town began to expand, room to build new buildings decreased. Foe-lelan began negotiation with Sunter, representative Carl Snapper, to buy the valley south of Vindivegg. This was currently in Sunter's territory, and it was being used as a sheep farm for wool. Foe-lelan offered to purchase the land, and Carl Snapper accepted his offer. Now, New Vindivegg had expanded southwards. New Vindivegg was set on enriching the landscape and expanding their influence. After this expansion, Foe-lelan spent his time running New Vindivegg and being in charge of directing many construction projects. He would also be drafted by Sharchin to fight against the AWA in the name of Alechia during this period. Foe-lelan would survive the war. After this event, he would return back to New Vindivegg to continue running the drunken lemur, being involved in the Zamotz Commonwealth, building up New Vindivegg, and helping out with the construction of Zamotz's capital city, Kolnor. The capital city project seeks to turn the Lemurian settlement him and Drafanaris built into the central hub of Zamotz. Foe-lelan would live a peaceful life, tending to his village, living in his manor. He had left his mark on Rathnir and Eldam. It was time for him to put everything behind him and rest. He would never take the title of King of Limuria. He had served as its prince for decades, and he was happy with that. He had left his legacy in Zamotz, and passed away peacefully, surrounded by companions he had met along the way, in his bed, in Yelkador Manor, New Vindivegg, Zamotz, Eldam. He wouldn't live to see the Comet Wars and the birth of the new world, Abexilus.
Finally done. That took fucking ages. Oh my god, I need to pee. Oh my